Good, good evening, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Possibilities. I'm your host, Danny Steeves, and I'm thrilled to have you along on tonight's episode. Tonight's episode is gonna be a topic that I haven't discussed on this show since season 2. Um, um, but it's a worthwhile conversation, and that is the topic of um um inclusive education. Now, inclusive education might might do might mean something totally different depending what what it means, depending what your viewpoint of it is. But we're gonna, me and my guest tonight is gonna tackle it from what we what we believe it is. So we invite you to um um enjoy this conversation. Tonight's guest is gonna be my friend and colleague, uh, Alice Soper. Now, now, uh, pardon, pardon me. Now, Alice has just recently, just recently, um, went through for her PhD, and co- she's just finished a paperwork, a paper on inclusive education. So I'm really anxious to talk to her and and see what what she's found out on from from a PhD standpoint on the topic of inclusive education. So I invite you to sit back and enjoy this conversation with with myself and Alice. So she's not quite here yet, but we'll take a bit of a break and then be right back with Alice Soper. Be right back, everyone. And and welcome back to Possibilities. Joining me now is Alice Soper, a PhD uh, student who just finished her PhD thesis on inclusive education. So I'm really looking forward to um diving deeper into this topic with her, and Alice and I were former colleagues, so I've been wanting to have her on the show for a long time. So here we go. welcome to Possibilities, Alice.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you for having me, and it's good to be part of the show.
Uh,
I've seen some videos, I've subscribed, so it's a pleasure to be on as a guest, I suppose. So thank you.
uh, you're, you're more than welcome and thank you for watching. Um, uh, First of all, for those, for those of you, for those of my audience who haven't, haven't, um, haven't really been exposed to inclusive education. How would you describe it in a nutshell to begin? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, so first of all, I just want to add that I started to get into the field, the topic of inclusive education during my PhD through an exercise to do a scoping review where I look at the literature on, and we'll probably get to that. But I look at the literature for papers that discuss inclusive education and ways of improving it through these disability awareness programs that aim to improve or create more favorable attitudes towards disability. So
Yeah.
that topic that I was interested got me more involved around or interested in inclusive education. Um, but essentially, what that is, to answer your question, is and I just want to add to inclusive education can look so different and varied, not only within Ontario,
Yeah.
across Canada, across different countries. So it really is variable, but the the general idea is that um, all kids, all students have the right to education, to
Yeah.
participate. That includes being in what we would refer to as general education schools. You might hear it referred to as mainstream schools, but that means that students with learning disabilities or difficulties, neurodevelopmental disabilities or conditions, for example, autism. Where these students are part of the class, they're part of a general education school, but it looks different or it can vary in that some
Yeah.
schools might have um, separate classrooms, so to speak, where there's perhaps more school staff available to support students.
Yeah.
Other students might be within a larger class, and they might have other kinds of supports also with school staff, but also alternative and augmentative communication devices, opportunities to, be able to take a break and take a break from perhaps sensory, overload in the classroom. It can be busy and bright and sometimes chaotic. So it's really varied in terms of what inclusive
Well,
education looks like.
well said, and I, I agree with you. Inclusive education can look different than depending what you're referring to. But I just want to ask you, um, what, and we'll jump back and forth, um, a little bit tonight. But I just want to ask you, what were some of your findings when you were doing this research?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, the research or the project was simply to explore the literature again, just what's out there in terms of studies that have been done by researchers, specifically on what we call disability awareness programs, which also look very different. And that's part of our findings is that there are a lot of different kinds of programs. You might call it an intervention, a set of sessions or workshops that um, essentially, not just raise awareness around disability, but, talk about it in terms of, um, what, feelings about disability and different types of disabilities and um, also, behaviors like how to include our peers. They might do that through role play activities. Um,
yeah,
Thinking about misconceptions and demystifying misconceptions with students. And these programs we identify programs across the school ages from kindergarten through to high school,
yeah,
which all look very different. But
yeah.
we found many. I mean, we did our search from 2013 or 2011 to 2024, and
Wow,
we identified 72 studies that were evaluating some sort of disability awareness program. So there were a lot.
wow. And and um and this might be a naive question, but w- um, were you kind of the brainchild of this, or what? How did that come about for you? Like, what what got you interested in this?
Yeah, so um I think that I was always interested in this and it was somewhat dormant
Yeah,
and in the back of my head. But as part of my PhD program, we can do a scholarly paper or a project on a topic that's different from our thesis. So my thesis is actually is a little different. So it was an opportunity for me to explore anything that I wanted, and that was what it was. And I actually Googled on Google Scholar, disability awareness programs in schools, and a search result came up of a systematic review that was done already on that topic. And I was like, oh, it's already been done. But it had been done just over a decade ago. So I thought,
mm,
why don't we update this search, picking up where this last systematic review ended, where their last search was 2011. Um, so picked it up where it left off, and we explored the more recent studies assessing these types of programs.
and and just um just diving off of your last point there. Within that decade, what what changes did you realize in terms of that last systematic review in your findings? Um, yeah,
Yeah, because the first review
yeah,
they included studies all the way back to the 80s.
yeah,
Yeah, and they had found because there were differences and differences that one would hope to find, and we did. But the first review found a lot of programs that were focused on awareness of disability. So really focusing on, what is, say, autism, what does that look like,
yeah,
different characteristics, like very focused on knowledge and awareness. The authors made a point that there were fewer studies that evaluated interventions that also included, topics around how do we feel about disability? How
yeah,
can we, stand up to for peers with disabilities and sort of study or programs that were more active and more than just knowledge and awareness, right? And we found that that was the case in the more recent review that I did with my team, where more programs, relatively more programs than that first review, were including topics beyond knowledge and awareness of disability.
yeah,
So thinking about, like I said, feelings, behaviors to, or behavioral intentions to include peers and how to interact and so on. So that was a key change that we found that we highlighted in the discussion. Again, suggesting that there is a need for programs that are more than, just knowledge and awareness alone, in order to increase more or have more favorable attitudes towards disability.
And and again, and you touched on this a bit before, but I want to ask you more about it. Um, when 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 you were approaching this project, did you did you get to pick your team that you work with, or were they assigned to you, or how did that work?
Hmm. Yeah, so I had a big team.
Um,
There were more than 10 of us. So in this type of project, where you're searching the literature, you're identifying studies that are related or relevant to your question. Um, you generally want to have a larger team because a handful of those people are going to be, sifting through sometimes thousands of results that you get from a search that, many of which are not relevant to your question, but you have to go through them. So sometimes it helps to have a larger team. But the team that was really involved in that process included four young people, youth, you know, young people, if you still call me young,
you
bit around my age,
you
who
can.
had, yeah, who had disabilities or a chronic condition. And they were all people who I didn't know. I had actually uh, essentially sent out an invitation on actually an Instagram account that you would know, Danny, the Youth Engagement
Yeah,
or Youth in Action.
yeah,
Um, yeah, so the people who are, follow that account are interested in research and becoming involved. So I shared about this review and that invitation on that Instagram page, that Youth in Action Instagram page, and I
yeah.
had a handful of people reach out. So then I met with them, talked a bit more about the project to see, if they were interested, and four of them ended up saying, yes, I want to be part of this. Um, Someone else who was very involved was a parent of um, several children with disabilities. And so,
Uh,
yeah, so she was very involved, and that was sort of the core team. And then there were some other trainees or PhD students, a postdoctoral fellow, and then other researchers who are involved in my PhD project, as well as my supervisor. So the team was large, but again, that core team was, four youth with lived experience and a parent, and they were very involved in going through the studies, collecting or um, consolidating the data, analyzing the data, preparing the paper. So very, very involved throughout the process.
um, that's great, and I can imagine that you can you need a big team when it comes to this work. Um um uh okay just diving a little bit deeper here. When you were doing this work, um, like how did uh, how did it work? Like, did you go into schools and see what the students were doing, or how what what how did you gather your findings?
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, I mean, I wish that I could have gone into schools that were, you know, doing or delivering disability awareness programs. I would have loved to actually have seen them in action.
uh,
Um, But our, like what we were looking at were papers, so, published papers about a study that evaluated the program. So to get a sense of what the program looked like, I was reading, a brief description of the kinds of activities that they did with students and the topics that they covered. So one
Yeah.
day I would love to be involved sort of on the ground. With students in classrooms, but this whole project was, behind a computer, again, reviewing papers that report on what they found, what worked, what didn't work with their program, their intervention.
So were you involved? Were you involved with schools and then they would report back to you on their findings or what? How did that work?
Yeah, I was never actually in touch with any of the schools that would have participated in studies or the researchers. And I wish I had maybe been more in touch with the researchers. That
Uh,
could have been possible. I hope in the future that's the case. Um, so yeah, so not exactly in that sense. We did get the attention actually of one school board in Ontario, and they asked that we present on the findings of the scoping review at a board meeting. So that was a way to share the findings and connect with people who are, educators who are not, all researchers. So it was good to connect with a different audience who actually are the people that can use this information. Um, so that was one, way that I connected with a school board or board meeting.
yeah,
Um, but other than that, the sort of presentations that we've done, sharing the information have been really at like conference presentations with researchers. We did do one for a not-for-profit organization
yeah,
um, that focuses on cerebral palsy. So that was, that would have reached,
yeah,
parents and family members and youth.
yeah.
But, doing this kind of conversation with you, Danny, is another great way of sharing about this work to a wide, very broad audience, which we really
Okay,
need to do more of.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Happy to help. The and uh um I should have asked you this earlier, but I'll ask you this now. What what sorts of and we touched on this a little bit, but what sorts of disabilities did you really key into? Like you mentioned autism and CP, of course, but what that's just the tip of the iceberg, I imagine. So what kind of other disabilities did you focus on?
hmm
Yeah,
So we didn't have a focus on
yeah,
disability or a particular
yeah,
disability because we wanted to get a sense of what is like what are the common like what is the focus of these programs overall. So for example, I've been saying autism a lot because um, we found like the autism was the most common disability or condition sort of focused program. And then we saw a lot of programs that were very general or broad and didn't focus on any one particular disability or condition, other than, focusing on physical or mobility. Related disabilities or conditions, learning difficulties or intellectual disabilities. So there were plenty that and again, these are, the programs. So plenty of
yeah,
programs that them in and of themselves were not specific to any one disability.
right.
But of those that were, that included, like I said, autism was the most common. There was one specific to Down syndrome. Um, one specific to Tourette syndrome, but generally they didn't have just one
Oh,
top
yeah,
focused type. And again, we didn't limit our
yeah,
search to any particular disability. So, seeing autism come up a lot was just a reflection of how common and prevalent um, these programs around autism awareness really are. So it
yeah.
also reflects, I suppose, the prevalence of autism itself.
Okay. Let if you wouldn't mind, let's kind of break down the different disabilities that you're studying and um let's kind of uh, dive a little deeper if you can and tell, tell me what your uh, findings were when it comes to. Let's start with autism and we'll work down the list if you have those findings.
hmm So I think there were about 8 programs that were specific to autism, and they ranged from kindergarten to high school.
Yeah,
Um, so the ones for younger students involved storybooks or videos that depicted characters with characteristics typically associated with autism. And those storybooks would have been read with students, and they would have had, discussions about those behaviors or characteristics. And that's
yeah,
very much a knowledge and awareness, I guess, element of a given program. Like I said, that is something that we saw um, a lot in those earlier studies from that first systematic review. We also saw then with those types of programs focused on autism for older students, um, inviting like guest speakers with autism, or what we would refer to that as social contact.
yeah,
So meeting people who, are doing all these great things who happen to have
yeah,
autism. Um, Another type of activity of a program focused on autism was role play. So teaching students how to, stand up for a peer with autism, or how to sort of interact given a certain behavior that they may not be familiar with. So it really varied even among programs on the same topic related to autism.
yeah,
Yeah. And then another, again, not a specific disability, but a sort of focused area, I suppose, was physical disabilities or related
uh,
to mobility.
yeah,
So those kind of programs typically involved activities related to simulations. So simulating uh, disability experiences, and I'll talk about
yeah,
this, the issues with it. But that would have looked like, students trying out, a wheelchair and navigating a physical environment, or for visual impairments or people who are
yeah,
hard of hearing, maybe wearing a blindfold or having the ears covered. So these kind of programs are, I mean, all these are very well intended programs,
yeah,
but I'm always a little skeptical, and some of the findings from these individual studies reflected this, but of some of the issues of, simulating these experiences that make people more inclined to pity than to empathize, which might be the intention. Or, the other issue is that disability is such a unique experience for everyone, and
yeah,
there's so many, intersections um, that affect that disability experience. So any one simulation can't capture that
yeah,
complexity and that uniqueness of any one individual. So it can be limiting in that way. And there were some concerns as well about these simulations that um, intended for students to see how it can be challenging. And, it's difficult, it's hard to have a disability. And that was sort of one approach that some programs took. And another was, hey, look at, um, try out these wheelchairs and see how enabling they are, right? How
yeah,
in the wheelchair you are enabled to do this and that. So
yeah.
they took a different spin on it, and it's very nuanced,
Like,
but very important and key to, um, show disability if you're going to do it through simulations in a
yeah,
positive way, where it's like, this is how people can be enabled and do all the things that you can do, or that they want to do, in spite of many of the challenges, right?
and,
But
yeah, and,
yeah.
and Chloe, go ahead.
Oh, I mean, I was just gonna say, like, it's complicated, right? Like um, these are programs that might
Yeah,
be, 5 sessions over 5 weeks, and
yeah,
researchers come in, they do the program, they study it, then they leave, and that's it. And there's
yeah.
so much more to understand about different disability experiences that it can be very
Yeah,
challenging.
agree. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and um, and I'm I'm sure the activities that you mentioned really depending on the age demographic of the students that you were tackling. Did it or not?
Yeah, in terms of activities
Yeah, yeah,
from the programs, yeah, like I
yeah,
mentioned, storybooks were more common in programs for, say, kindergarten students. And then, sort of as you worked your way up in age and stage to high school, it was more common to see activities like simulations, like I mentioned,
yeah,
simulating disability experiences, as well
yeah,
as social contact. So, for example, actually, a lot of the programs focused on physical disabilities or mobility concerns had guest speakers or presenters who, in a handful of cases, were Paralympians,
uh,
which is neat to see. And some of those also had students try out different parasports.
uh,
Um, yeah, and again, that was a type of activity that was more common in high school for older students.
yeah, um, absolutely. Okay, I'm curious to know, um, was there, was there an age demographic that, um, uh, really hone in on the importance of it, or it, was it kind of average all the way through? Like, yeah, yeah,
A particular demographic in terms of characteristics of the students that would
yeah,
have been receiving the program,
yeah,
or
yeah, yeah,
um not I can't I don't know if I can quite comment on that. I mean, we didn't in terms of demographics, we just really looked at the age,
mm,
and
okay,
grade. Yeah, and didn't go into other demographic characteristics
okay,
that maybe we could have compared. For example, we found programs across 26 different countries um,
oh,
around the world. And, we did talk about, it'd be interesting to, draw some comparisons, but we didn't get into that just because, um, policies around inclusive education can look so different from one country to another. Like there were just a lot of variables that might have been, um, many variables that we'd have to consider if we were to make a comparison. And it wasn't one of our research questions, but that did come up in conversation about, yeah, like what other demographic characteristics, beyond countries as well, could we look at? But again, we really stuck to simply the age and grade.
Um, okay, what, um, when you were looking at those findings, um, paper after paper after paper, what, what really, what really surprised you on that front?
You're right, what
Yeah,
surprised
yeah,
us? Yeah.
yeah.
So okay, so I would say
Or, or what surprised you, and then let's flip the coin and say what didn't surprise you.
right.
Let's do
Yeah,
it.
so what did surprise me and what didn't surprise me?
Yeah,
So I mentioned before how there were relatively more programs from the past decade, like from our search, that included more than just knowledge and awareness of disabilities compared to that first systematic review that included studies back to the 80s. And I don't want to know I don't want to say if that particularly surprised me, but it was something that I was hoping or thought I might see in the findings. So again, I don't know if it was quite a surprise, but it was nice to see. It was like, oh, that's great because,
yeah,
if we're going to improve attitudes towards disability and our behaviors in terms of inclusion and acceptance, then you really do need more than just knowledge and awareness. There's so much more around our feelings, and around how we can um, uh,
yeah,
demonstrate inclusive behaviors, and so on. Um, Something that didn't surprise me so much. I mean, I mentioned it before, um, about the simulation type activities where, they were relatively common in the programs for secondary school students. Um, but the uh, concern that I had going into it that was reflected in the findings from these studies, especially the qualitative studies that did interviews, were the concerns around sort of potential negative effects of simulations, where, like I said, they might be well intended and they want to promote feelings of empathy, but from interviews, it comes across, or students are commenting in a way that demonstrates pity, or an effect that the researchers did not intend to have. And also just the limitation, like I said as well, about um, you're not able to simulate such a complicated and unique disability experience, right?
yeah,
Um, and so again, I was had that concern to begin with, and I was trying to set aside my bias as well because I knew that going into it, I was already thinking that way. But from the studies that did do interviews that were qualitative, those were sometimes reflected in the findings. And some of the studies, the researchers commented on this in the discussion as a concern.
yeah,
Um, so I'm not, against doing simulation activities, but they just have to be done with a lot of context around
uh,
them, having conversations to like unpack the simulation experience, um, where it's more than, wearing a blindfold, right?
yeah,
It's
yeah,
yeah, so much more. So again, I wasn't surprised, I suppose, to see that, while
yeah,
also being mindful of my own bias
yeah,
going into it.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Um, uh, when when you when you when you were reading about those simulations progr- programs or um whatever you call them, um what what and you mentioned some of the simulations were quite worrisome to you and your team. Can you share with me what kind of simulations were will we come in again? You touched on that a bit before, but tell me more if you
Hmm.
don't mind.
Yeah. Um, and again, sometimes like it's difficult to understand some of these outcomes around, say, like pity versus empathy and um,
Yeah,
in quantitative measures, like a lot of the studies only included quantitative measures, so evaluating um, attitudes before and after the program, but it's the interviews that got more at those nuances around how students perceive disability after, say, having it participated in a simulation activity. Um, and I found that, and this was relatively common, but like the blindfolding activity to simulate visual impairment, um, like led to again like feelings about how this is difficult and the limitations and without necessarily follow up around how people with visual impairments are and can be enabled, right? So
yeah,
if you're doing a program that tries to create more positive attitudes towards disabilities, I think you want to make sure that you're having conversations after the simulation that put that into context, right? Around, yeah, yes, it is challenging, but let's not be pitiful. Let's look at what can be done and how people who might have visual impairments, are still able to do this and that can,
yeah,
uh, help promote more positive attitudes towards, say, that particular type of, visual impairment. Um, but again, that sort of finding came up from those qualitative studies where you're actually
yeah,
interviewing people and you can get at that nuance, like I said, between like pity and empathy, for example.
yeah. And what and what wrapping wrap, wrapping up shortly here, but what when you talk about keeping a conversation going, like just not finishing the conversation and it not not sorry, not just finishing the study, but keeping the conversation going. What in your mind would be the best way to keep those conversations going around in, inclusion in the school?
Hmm.
Yeah,
I think, because of the nature of this project, we're looking at studies that evaluate an intervention, and that's a disability awareness program. And, they're delivered in the school, they're evaluated, that's it, that's done. In some cases, the programs like continue to be rolled out. Like you can look them up and they have a website and they still do, um, sessions and workshops in schools and they continue to roll them out, um, which is good to see. But I think that to keep a conversation going that's continuous and sustainable, this kind of, disability awareness program idea should be just part of, school curriculum, or it's just present in everyday life, to the point that it is what it is. Like,
yeah,
from kindergarten and on, you might have storybooks in the kindergarten class that include
yeah,
characters with disabilities or who
yeah,
use a wheelchair. Like all, gym classes include like a unit with on para sports. And so it just becomes something that's not
yeah,
a one-time intervention, but it's just done throughout school from
yeah,
kindergarten
yeah,
onward, starting early, and just making it part of school, part of curriculum, part of life.
yeah. Um, okay, um, but what would your message be to someone who is hesitant to make that switch. Put particularly teachers in the classroom.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if someone were hesitant, especially teachers, it might be because they don't feel prepared.
Yeah,
They might agree with it. They're probably like, that's great in theory, but it can be hard to actually do and practice in a classroom when there's so much else going on for teachers. So for someone who's hesitant, I would think, or it's probably because, like I said, they may not feel prepared or not know how to have those kind of conversations, for example. So I think there really needs to be, professional development training, which, does happen, but that needs to continue, or even in, students who are doing their Bachelor of Education, like to make sure that there's more um, within that curriculum that supports teachers to feel they have the knowledge, the capability to have these kind of conversations. Because again, I think I don't know. I think it'd be hard to find someone who disagrees, and it really comes down to
yep,
how knowledgeable and capable people are. So we need to make sure that there's training and support to do this.
agreed. Um, okay. And what um uh what about the end here? But what what if someone is um watching us or listening to this? What would be your interested in finding out more about the project? Where 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 can I find more about it?
Yes. How can we share the findings more broadly? And that's so important. So first of all, feel free to contact me. I'll share, Danny has my email, but
Yeah, yeah.
that could be shared, or people can reach out to Danny to get that email and have a
Okay. I'll put
direct
it.
conversation.
Yeah. I'll put it in the description. So yeah, I'll put
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we also have, we publish the scoping review, and we also have a complimentary scoping review that looks at the outcomes assessed by these studies and longer term effects of disability awareness programs. So those can be shared. Unfortunately, they are not open access, but I can share the full text with anyone who reaches out. Um, so, and then again, like this video, like this is a great way to spread the word, but I know people who are listening to it have already seen it and are looking for more ways. And that's something that's so important that I think I can and we all can do better to make sure that, everyone's accessing this type of information who's interested.
Um. Great point, Alice. And I, I, I want to um uh really thank you for joining me today. You you gave us quite uh um an overview of inclusive education. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Danny. And the questions were fantastic to dig a little bit deeper into the scope and review and what we found. And I think it's been getting darker
Yeah,
over time here. As you could see, I didn't
yeah.
turn my light on, so we're
Oh,
we're getting yeah.
yeah. Before we let you go, what what is what is next for the project? Like, is it done now or what?
Yeah, so I think that these reviews have and are going to be informing my future work. Like right now, I'm looking at doing some work with this really fantastic project being done in Quebec called Towards More Neuro-Inclusive Schools. And part of that does consider, attitudes towards disabilities. And I think that there's a place there for the kinds of activities that we found in these programs and how those could be applied in a classroom setting. Um, so that's one potential project, and I've met with researchers who are doing similar work and who are creating and delivering similar types of disability awareness programs that we've seen in the scoping reviews. So I think it's just the beginning, and I hope to, and I will, use the findings from these reviews to, inform that future work. But I
Yeah,
think it's just the beginning.
great,
Yeah.
great. And uh, sorry, um, I, I keep forgetting stuff. But it, if someone wants wants to get involved in the work you are doing, um, are you open to having other people join you on board, or is that kind of closed now?
Oh,
Or,
yeah. I'm always open for, anyone to connect who wants to be involved. And you're right that the scope and review project itself is done. But so much more I think is going to be and is happening. So if anyone wants to be involved or learn more in any way, then yeah, reaching out to me is the best.
uh, uh, okay, um, uh, and, I'm sure that this won't be our last conversation. You're welcome. You're welcome back anytime, Alice. So keep us in the loop and all of this to you.
Of course. Thank you, Danny.
Thank you, and we will be right back. Uh, Welcome back, everyone. Um, wasn't that a great conversation with Alice Soper? Um, it got a little bit too much. And it might have got a bit technical, but hopefully you got something out of it. I know I did. So, um, like like Alice said, it was it. You can always reach out to her. I'll put her email in the description if you want to find out more about it. So you can always reach out to her. Um, and if you want to reach out to me here at, at the show, my email address is possibilitiesshow@gmail.com. Um, and I will see you next time. Take care, everyone. Bye for now. Oh, and keep the dish out of disability. Bye for now.